everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Church Encourager podcast. I'm Douglas Laws. Also here is my father, Pastor Steve Laws. Last weekend at Keys Vineyard Church, we started a new series called Kingdom Consummated, and we're going to be going through the discussion guide for that sermon. It was really a powerful message you preached last weekend, Dad, and a few questions about it for today. We were presented recently with a lot of just tragic news and violence. And, the first part of your message where you addressed the names of those we'd heard in media recently. How do you typically respond when you hear that news? And, I would say, can you kind of reveal how our first reaction reveals about where we place our hope?
Yeah. And, depending on how long the shift is, I think whenever this would be my thinking anyway, that when we're presented with these horrible situations, that we often, I don't like, what's the world coming to? And, what does this mean for us? And, and that you sort of get going through that. And then you realize that this has been ongoing for thousands of years. And, for the last 2,000 years in particular, because of what Jesus has done, that's where our hope needs to go, is that he's made a way through all this. But I don't think we've always understood biblical hope to the extent that I find really helpful, that there's more than just floating off in the clouds, that he's at the end of Revelation, he's bringing back, that the heavenly Jerusalem comes down out of heaven to earth. Earth is renewed and restored. And it's a reset of where we were in the first two chapters of Genesis. And that when I think you can hold all of that in context with where we are, it begins to make a difference, because there's something about knowing what he's going to do and how we're not just floating off and walking all away from this, that he's putting this new. Then I think we begin to realize that the hope that we have begins to settle into the now, and the things that we do make a difference now. And so I think all that's very helpful. It's just very difficult. It's shocking, the level of things that are taking place, and just so fast. That's one of the things we talked about. So my hope would be that within a reasonable amount of time after the initial shock, because I don't know that if these things keep happening, it's overwhelming but the sort of more you're able to get yourself back into the bigger story, and that how it ends, says, what's it coming to? Well, I know what it's coming to, so I don't need to ask that question like that, right? Where it's all heading back into the return of Jesus. So we have that hope, and that's a big deal. That doesn't mean that we get an escape from the mess right now. So I think that, I hope that helps. If you're not being able to make that shift, then I think you get stuck in trying to fix the mess in the now. And the reality is the mess isn't going to get fixed in the now. So.
Yeah, good stuff. There was another question here in the guide. From the sermon, you were contrasting the first disciples. And, I had mentioned a few weeks ago how like the Jewish education system would work at the time, where, all the kids would kind of learn the first few books of the Bible. Then there was a group that moved on where they'd go through the Navim and the Ketuvim and learn, those things and memorize that. And then the next group up would find a rabbi and apprentice under the rabbi. The first disciples, they were in one of the groups that didn't make that next level cut. They were sent to learn a trade. And so they were fishermen, they were other things. And, Jesus, the greatest rabbi of all, said, hey, you guys will work, come join me. So, we contrasted those disciples who were, not chosen for that next group up. And you contrasted them with the rich young ruler who was, well respected, he was wealthy, but he wasn't willing to make that final choice to give up everything and follow Jesus. How do those stories how do they resonate with some of our spiritual journeys as we're, listening to the sermon, and why does it resonate with some of our stories?
Yeah, well, in the midst of it all, those stories were about, because ultimately it's all about following Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Got to follow Jesus, and
That's the key.
there's a lot of competition for what it even looks like to follow Jesus, if you would, right? And so we have to sort of, I wanted to present these groups that were coming. One of them is unwanted. That's because at some point along their journeys, they didn't make the grade, right? They weren't good enough. And then the rich young ruler is more represents to me the unsatisfied. He has all the stuff, but he knows something is missing. And they all get the same invitation. They just make different choices. But I do think it's fascinating. I don't know if people ever think about this. That so the disciples, it's very possible that the disciples were all teenagers um, when they began to follow Jesus, or very early 20s. And I think I don't know if when we think about the disciples, we think of them as very much young men, right?
Yeah.
I mean, could be early teens, and that's a wild thing when you sort of think that the Lord put everything in these guys' hands. And it's pretty crazy, but I do think it changes the story some when you begin to think about these weren't a bunch of 40, 50 year most likely. These were because of what we know about the culture, these would have been younger guys that were willing to follow Jesus. And somewhere in that, some early 20s, because I think, historically we think some of them are married and some other things. So, but not all of them. And maybe it's just because they were very young. But I don't think I answered the question, did I? So,
Well, there's lots to talk about there.
yeah. But so sort of a group that didn't make the grade, kind of the unwanted or rejected, and then the other group, which is not that, but still isn't satisfied. That is sort of to me encompass the whole sort of a big way of the spectrum. Like when if sometimes we may have gone our own way because we didn't feel like we were wanted in his way, and other times we might be going our own way and we still don't find it satisfying. But with all of those things going on, we still need to follow Jesus, and that he makes that invitation. And the real thing that we have to do is say yes. That's where life is. You say yes, and then you follow Jesus and you follow him all in.
As we talk about going all in and following Jesus, it really requires us to, just develop this relationship with him. One of the things you said in the sermon was that there's no cliff notes for this relationship with Jesus. What practices have helped you develop a deeper, more personal relationship with him?
Um, and what I was trying to talk about there was culturally in particular, we're always looking for, and I'm sure it's always been, but we're looking for shortcuts. Like, well, I got to do this, but is there a shortcut? I've laughed when I went to college. We didn't have the internet, and we would be assigned reading, and often I would walk down to the local bookstore and buy the Cliff Notes, because I was just kind of looking for the quickest way through. Looking back on that, I hope that's not everybody's experience. Although I know they sold a lot of Cliff Notes, because you would love for people that are learning to take the time to do all that's required. There's reasons behind it, but the mentality is, I just want to get through this, and that is what it is. That's young and cultural and all that other stuff. Just what the old saying we always chuckle about. C's get degrees, and
That got me through college.
but see, now you're at a place though where you take courses and you want to learn. Right?
Yes. Well, there's not the pressure of, doing it just for a piece of paper. It's just,
Right.
okay, now it's just to learn more. And
Yeah.
yeah, that
But
changes
the
things.
different, because I'm always, we deal with students quite a bit because of the Bible Institute. And my hope is always that they would just like, oh, this is great, and really take the time to get everything that's offered. But there's still that pressure. A lot of them just want to, I get it. And it's in that pressure. So in our relationship with Jesus, it can be the same sort of thing. What's the quickest thing? Or, do we need to do anything? Or, And I have found that, man, I have to slow down, take a breath, and really purposefully spend time with Jesus and ask him questions. I said in my message that I don't know how, because everybody's relationship is different, I'm sure. When I ask Jesus questions, I feel like he often asks me questions back. And I would like it to be more like Chat GPT. Here's my question, boom, here's the answer. And
That's
that's
great when it works, right?
yeah, but it's certainly not how it works. He
No,
doesn't do
not
that.
not in this.
He's like, well, what do you think? I'm like, well, that's what. Yeah. Anyway, um, and I sort of shared in the story that in the past week, going to him with things, and I felt like, at one point he said, go read this, and then I did, and the next day I felt like, and he was saying, well, you know, well, what about this, and how does that work? And then well, what, other things that were come up, I asked him, and he goes, well, what do you think? So, his desire, I believe, is for relationship with us. So he does what he needs to do to engage us in relationship. And so, I try and make time for that. I try to make time for reading the word every day. I have a little group that sort of helps me be accountable. My postscript group, we're gonna actually move that over into one of the church encourager slots next year. So we can invite more people, maybe from the Bible Institute. Right now it's kind of just Keys Vineyard. And but we've been doing that for a while. That's helpful because there's, readings every day and there's people making comments, and that can sort of pull you in. And then, trying to organize, structure life in a way that you have time to plug in and ask questions and do the things that are important. And you have to be careful of things that steal that time away. Uh, the you know without because it's not a pick, but social media will steal hours off of your life
Oh my
without
goodness.
you even realizing it, and that's time that sometime I'm sure is fine, but that's time that could be, some of that time could be redeemed for maybe hanging out with Jesus a little bit. So that's just a thought. So there's no quick. It's not. That, and the other thing that's always been is we would like it to be, tell me the rules and I'll do that and then I'm done, because that's quicker and easier, right? And that's just not how it works. It's not like that. It's here's what he gave us, this amazing word. What does it mean? To really start to get that, you got to have the context, which is a lot of effort. It's a lifelong journey and people, it just is. It takes whatever life you have, constantly doing it. It's designed that way to be a daily interaction between you and the Lord in the Word. So,
And one of the things you mentioned in the sermon was that you have to do it yourself.
mm,
You can't just rely on someone else to do it for you. Whether you're a pastor's kid, whether you're, just a church congregant, you have to have your own relationship with Jesus in order to experience the life we're calling you to. And you have to just read and chew on it yourself, and you just kind of have to do the thing. So that's good.
there's no there's no substitute for learning and thinking in particular. And I'm my concern is with everything that's coming at us, it goes after our thinking, and that the moment we stop thinking for ourselves, we're in big trouble. And even the ability in that next series that we're going to do, one of the things I'm kicking around is we're going to call it Kingdom Influence. It's how do we retake the ability to disagree
Hmm.
and still love people? Because it's right now, the thing is that often people want to know your opinion, because if it doesn't agree with their opinion, you're done. And that's not how it should be. It should just be, that's your opinion. It's okay. That doesn't mean that I don't love you. We've moved away from a time when people could have differing opinions and still be close.
Cordial.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, no, close. I mean, more than cordial, close.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
it didn't matter. It was okay. That's your opinion. But, we still love one another. And I'm afraid that we're losing and have lost the ability to do that. It's like, parents and children. I mean, we have different opinions, but we don't stop loving each other, right? I mean, but I don't know that we've culturally are able to do that anymore, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, very concerning. I will say, just this last week, I've just decided to do, less social media. I removed Facebook and Instagram off my phone. I still have YouTube. There's some finance videos I like, but less time with that. And I've noticed just a big difference in my mood. You have a similar testimony where years ago you just stopped watching cable news because it was just spinning you up all the time. So it's the same thing. And uh, one of the catches of our society is they want you, just whatever algorithms are in charge, they want you to pick a side so they can market to you better and sell you things. Which I hate to go to that part with it, but it's just that's it. It's like, okay, if I can get this person in this box will get all these things. You know what I mean? So with everything, just take it to the Lord. Start there, and don't get stuck on any one vein, other than the Lord's. So,
And part of the concerns about that is that it's all those things are happening now less and less with people and more by robot.
yeah. Well,
And
one of the studies I'm in, our spiritual formation, part of it, of what forms us spiritually, are the stories that we interact with, that we hear, and the amount of just robot generated content on the internet. Just, don't let your spirit be formed by AI, right? And
no,
we talk about it a lot on these podcasts, but that's where our culture is heading towards. We have people who just interact way more with technology than the people around them. It's frightening. I was just at the grocery store the other day, young lady just walking through like this the whole time. And, I mean, mine's down here because I got my grocery list on there. I'm trying to defend myself. But I don't think you keep your grocery list here. Right. And I'm like, don't run into me. These aisles are narrow enough. Like it's frightening where we're heading. But I think it's all the more important that we encourage one another to have our own relationships with the Lord. That's going to be how we change our society, how we influence it, is that we're living out the gospel that we preach and the hope that it possesses. And people need to know what it is. The understanding we have of biblical hope we find in Revelation chapters 21 and 22. How does understanding that biblical hope then respond? How does that change how we respond to the violence and the tragedies in the world? Kind of as we close, I want to end with this last discussion question for you to answer.
yeah, and which is why this series, which wraps up this 2-year series, and that everything has to be hanging out in this hope, because the hope of the future breaks into this hope, the hope that we have now. If we don't understand the hope that we have for the future, we will think it's all about the now. And then what's happening in the now, which is extremely important, don't get me wrong, because that's where we live, but there's more to it than that. And we can be consumed that we need to work it out right now. And a lot of times we can't. It's what's coming that will eventually take care of that. Well, in response to that, then how do we live? Which is why knowing the whole story, knowing the beginning, going back to Genesis, knowing what God's heart was, knowing what we did and messed that up. He's never given up, and he's making a way back, and he's going to reset that. And then what does that look like for us? And that's the bigger story. The bigger story is bigger than us right now, 2025, wherever we happen to be. There's things happening around us, but there's a bigger part of the story. We have to live, I think, with an understanding that what we do impacts our community more than anything. There's a pull to think every church in every community has a mission which is somewhat different from other churches and other communities. And you can't sort of go, well, we got to do this, we got to do that. What do we do in the community that you are called to, where your church is, and what does that look like? For us, we're on an island, we're on a small chain of islands, and it looks different than if we were in a big, huge city. It's just different because they're not the same. It's completely different sort of things. And I think it's important that we sort of are looking at those things as we try and hang into the bigger picture. But if you don't have a hope, then all that you have is in this moment. And when this moment is a mess, you basically are just like, well, I'm done. I mean, I talked about the Essenes. They were done. They just pulled out, and that's really not one of the options we have because we can't be salt and light in the world. But we need to be salt and light, and you can't do this without Jesus. That's all I know. I haven't got it figured out. I keep telling people I don't know. I got to press in every day. I can only give you scripture and sort of context because I don't know. I mean, opinions are so powerful that we just have to be very careful with those things, and sort of have to learn what that looks like. I don't want people to go on my opinion. I want people to go with Jesus, right?
It's always encouraging when you say you just want people to follow Jesus, and always appreciate that. And thank you for answering these questions. Really, it was a powerful message this weekend, and I'm looking forward. I'm up with part 2 next weekend. We'll be looking more in that biblical hope and talking about that. Very excited about it. So join us this weekend at Keys Vineyard coming up for Kingdom Consummated Part 2. We will be on Thursday with our online Bible Instruction Network podcast, as well as we look ahead to that sermon. So anyway, thank you all for listening. We will see you next week.